Welcome to Eggs, the podcast, featuring the best and brightest minds in business leadership, entrepreneurship, and technology. On today's episode, we have Ryan Talbert, a full-time software engineer at 1904 Labs and lead instructor at ThriveDX. Ryan is a seasoned business systems developer with several years of web application design and business management experience in various sectors. He is recognized for demonstrating a natural aptitude for software engineering, as well as detailed programming and information analysis. Colleagues describe Ryan as a progressive, driven, down-to-earth application design and business expert who can be relied on to offer superior solutions, delivering profitable results on time and under budget. Our listeners can count on a great conversation with lots of actionable insights. We're thrilled to have Ryan on the show today, so let's get started. Please join us in welcoming to the show, Ryan Talbert. Hey, Ryan, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So let's maybe start a little bit at the beginning. We've given a little bit of a top level view, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are today, and what you're doing?
Yeah, of course. So my background is, first of all, my parents have always been entrepreneurial, so they've instilled that in me since a very young age. But my personal background, I guess where things get interesting is when I went to college. I went to St. Louis University. I decided to join entrepreneurship program, and I took the entrepreneurship program, created this business idea, and school ended. And, I was the first in the unemployment line, had nothing lined up because nobody's really hiring entrepreneurs per se. But I had this idea for an app called Herd Map. And what it was, I wanted to go out and party. I wanted to have a good night out. So this app would post markers all over Google Maps. And the more people that were using the app, these markers would get redder and redder and redder. So if you were new to a town or something, you could go out bar hopping, stuff like that. So that is kind of what started my foray into software engineering. And it's kind of a crazy story, but I started this app. Had no kind of coding ability. I didn't even own a computer till I was probably about 24. Like that was after college. But I had this app going and I was shopping it around on Upwork. I think it was called Elance at the time. But wanted to get somebody to build this app. Was looking around. Ended up finding a guy. He built me an MVP, and I'm like, man, this is really some cool stuff. Like I like the tech world. I like doing this. And I think I was working at Home Depot at the time, just pushing carts, trying to figure out what my next thing was, trying to get this app off the ground. And one of my coworkers had, I believe it was a nephew who he said was like a real whiz at coding. So I ended up linking up with this guy and giving him money, building this app. And he ended up taking the money and running. Like he lived in, I found out he lived in Pakistan, which was crazy because I met him stateside. Like we met up several times, but I ended up pouring my life savings into this app. Pretty nutty. And he took me for everything I had. I ended up disappearing. I got a half-baked Android and iOS app. So I'm sitting there like, fuck, like just got screwed for my entire life savings, like huge depression. What am I going to do now? And I was like, you know what? If I teach myself how to code, if I really get good at this stuff, maybe I won't get screwed again. Maybe I can cut out the middleman. So that's kind of my story. That's kind of where things picked up, and that's how I ended up where I am now. So it's kind of like a weird revenge thing.
You know what? I love this because it's almost identical to how I got into it. I met a guy off of Craigslist from South Africa to help me build my app. And he ended up going back to South Africa, and it was a 2-year nightmare of getting an actual deliverable done. He finally came through with it. It was a PHP project, and it just, when we were talking initially, it turned out, we'll have it up in a month, and it turned into 2.5 years, and then finally got something that kind of worked. And after that, we shopped around on Upwork to get the rest of it done. So it's a very similar kind of pulling your hair out and then realizing, if I just teach myself this, and I don't have to deal with this third party kind of nonsense. So
yeah.
Can
And you know
really
what?
relate.
I think a lot of people have experienced that, especially with the rise of like this freelancing culture. Like there's a lot of good people out there, a lot of people trying to take your money. And I forgot to mention the craziest part, right? So he ran back to Pakistan where he was living. He kept giving me the runaround. I'm going to build this. I'm going to build this. And I got what he convinced me to do. And you got to remember, I am not technologically savvy at this point. He convinced me to buy a server on premise in Germany. So I buy this server in Germany. I'm paying like $60 a month. I forget the actual total. But I end up getting a cease and desist letter from the country of Germany saying your server has been tied into over like 1,000 phishing events, credit card stealing. So he had me buy this overblown server, and he's just scamming people left and right, making a killing. It was a total fumble. So,
Wow. That's next level. I mean, he's probably mining Bitcoin on it at your expense.
yeah, maybe,
So,
maybe.
Yeah, no, that's funny. Well, you got to appreciate people's level of sophistication because, man, it wouldn't even occur to me to do that kind of thing to somebody, but I guess desperate times. So,
Yeah.
so let's talk about sort of your next step from there. Then, just sort of as you're continuing in your career trajectories. So, you've taught yourself some skills, and I think a lot of people get to that point, and they start a business, or they start freelancing, or they start doing whatever using their skill set. But what did you do next after you sort of had developed a level of competency to move forward?
So I've always sort of had like a 5-year plan. I've developed businesses on the side that I've really wanted to take off. I got one going on now called Mo Gas Tax Back. We can get into that in a little bit, but really, what I knew was like, if you're going to enter in a new field, you got to have some fancy footwork to pick up for the lost time where you're trying to break into something or do it. So really my goal was to get my first job. So that was one of the first things I did was just, I learned this, I taught myself, I started applying to places. I got my first kind of big break into the coding world at this local startup in St. Louis. So that was pretty much my next step. But I was building stuff on the side the whole time too.
so did Herd Map take off? Did it do okay? Or was it kind of like a trial and error and then you just moved on?
Yeah, it was a lot of trial and error. I think when you're working with developers, especially when you're not super tech savvy, you gotta have your vision laser focus, right? Because you're almost essentially spending money to test out different things, different features, things like that. So Herd Map did not end up working out for me at any big scale. I think I ended up with 40 paying businesses on it locally, but I was running into a chicken and egg problem. Like what comes first, the users or the businesses willing to put you on the map and things like that. So unfortunately, I learned a lot, but that one did not really go many places.
Well,
No, well, it's interesting to hear about that though, because I think too about the process, right? I mean, if you're not particularly tech savvy, as it sounds like you weren't in the moment, um, I guess in my head, and maybe I'm just naive, but in my head, that I think that I think people are really smart, and I think that developers must have like a way of doing things, and there's a simple formula, I guess, for building an app or something like that. And just recently, I've found myself engaged with a startup, and I'm discovering that what I thought was very smooth and fluid is actually just like wild and all over the place, and nobody actually knows what they're doing. They're just all trying to solve problems. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just your process, or a little more about that process, in terms of just, I mean, what were your expectations going in? Did you think it was kind of an easy thing and it turned out to be a bigger deal? Or like what sort of, I guess, learnings did you walk away with?
Yeah, are you talking about Herd Map specifically, or just like
It could be Herd Maps or just maybe app development as you start to grow.
Yeah, so here's what I get. Like I think I have a unique view on this because I am completely self-taught. Like just whatever kind of scraps I could get, that's how I taught myself, right? No formal education in this. And a lot of times I still feel like an imposter, right? Even with like 16,000 followers, people following me for content and stuff. But the thing that always blew me away is like a lot of people getting into the journey kind of get stopped right at the starting line because they think of like coding or like just building apps or stuff like that as something that's like really difficult. Like they see it and they're like, that's not for me. But I've met so many people in this industry that like have no business being in it, and they're rock stars. Like they are incredible. Like one of this guy I actually met him on Upwork. He ended up mentoring me for a little bit. I'd pay him a couple $100. We'd do like, 4 times a month to meet or whatever. He lived in Egypt, right? And he was a dentist. And he said, I can't look at teeth anymore. I can't do it. Let me go into coding. And he is probably the best, just straight up coder I've ever met. And, technical skills wise, he's probably not the greatest, didn't grow up with a computer, stuff like that, but he's just so good at it. And I really think that anybody, if you want to do it, can do it. And same thing with building an app, right? Like you look at an app, like especially like HerdMap, that had so many moving parts, but the process was baby steps. Like first I'm like, well, how do I build this, or how do I even find the right person to build this? And they might build a prototype, and you're looking at the full picture at the end of something, but really it's just a sort of like trial and error, baby steps, and you kind of get somewhere towards the end. So does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. I poke at these insights because first of all, I think you raised a really great point, which is I think a lot of people quit before they get started.
Yeah.
Because of what seems like complexity, and I guess really is complexity. A lot of people talk themselves out of it before actually entering the journey. And so I think that maybe that's something to talk about overcoming. But also just, I think the process in general, I think sometimes can be harder to accomplish than you think it is. And maybe I'm speaking at it from a different angle, right? Because I run a marketing agency, right, and we're often sort of sold short in that people don't understand how complex things are to do. Right. So they go, oh, well, all I want to do is promote this thing, or all I want to do is sell more of this widget, or all I want to do is XYZ, whatever it is. And it's very easy to say, all I want to do is that, all I want is an app that shows where people are at in town, but when you sit down and actually have to break that into something actionable, or you actually have to try and work with a developer to solve these problems, like then you start to uncover the complexity. And so I think that, if we're going to make 2 points here, it's one, don't be afraid to step forward and actually take on the challenge. Like, this is stuff that people can learn, and with the right experts around you, you can do it. And then, maybe the second thing is, understand that it is going to be complex. So there's no reason to be afraid of it.
Yep. And another point too is like the community, the software development community specifically is like pretty nutty. I've never seen anything quite like it. All the open source tools out there, all the people willing to put their code, all the people out there that are willing to give a helping hand. Now, any kind of problem you're running into, like Discord has groups for like specific coding things. It's really like an exercise in creativity, I think. And that's kind of what fascinates me about coding is like, I always joke around and say coding is the most human thing you can do, because you're typing on something a human built, talking in a language a human built. Like everything is sort of this like just human built thing, and it's just the environment and the people around doing it are so willing to give a helping hand. And things like Google, things like ChatGPT, things like Stack Overflow, all these different things you can really build some crazy stuff, right? Using other people's code and just kind of winging it.
I second that as far as the community of developers goes. Anytime I've kind of ran into an issue or a problem, I've literally jumped in the yellow pages or on Google and searched for software developers in my area, called them and said, hey, I'm in a boot camp and I have to get this project done tomorrow. Can you answer a question for me? And I had a 30-minute conversation with the guy back and forth, and he was able to troubleshoot some issues that I had. I jumped on Meetup, and I've got a couple of monthly groups that I'll attend, and specifically in JavaScript. And they're the salt of the earth, greatest people I've met. They're all, we don't even really talk about software. We talk about what's going on in our daily lives. And if we run into a bug, then I'll bring it up at the end of the conversation, and they always are there. It's great. I think it comes down to the fact that they've been through it themselves, and when you've gone through that process of trial and error and banging your head against the monitor for 3 hours, they understand how difficult it is, and if they can help, they usually will. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I was running into the problem with the app I'm running now. The state of Missouri is offering a refund on all the tax you pay for gases. So I made an app that uses artificial intelligence. You take a picture of your receipt, it gets all the information, and July 1st rolls around, you can get all that money back. And I was having the hardest time getting these local notifications to pop off. That's a notification that comes up on your phone, like saying like, hey, do this, this, and this, or whatever. The framework I was using was pretty complex and the documentation wasn't there. So kind of hitting my head against the wall. I go on Google, I find a guy out in London who wrote an article 3 years ago. I message him on LinkedIn. I'm like, hey, man, I'm running into an issue. I'm following your article. I can't get it to work. He's like, I haven't touched this stuff in 3 years, dude, but I'll hop on a call with you right now. Look it over. And it's like, I mean, this dude's an engineer at Yelp, right? Like making good money, has no reason to help, anybody really. But it's like other industries, you don't get that. But that's one of the skills, like one of my core skills of like being a software engineer is like, you can tell where somebody's skill level is out by their willingness to ask for help. Because a lot of like when you're getting started, it's embarrassing. It's like somebody's going to know I don't know what I'm talking about. But as you go further along, like my one of my bosses told me this, it's like an accelerant. And that kind of like makes its way into all portions of your life. Like I used to be so afraid of asking for help, but since starting this career and really doing this, like, man, if I can get over the hump with your help in 3 minutes versus 3 days, 3 months, 3 years, why not do it? I'll take the pride hit and really get over that hump and keep it moving. So that's one of the big things too, is like this community's taught me. So
yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. It's actually one of the things I think that is unique to software or whatever, pick your programming. I think it's sort of indicative of ventures or industries that are sort of pioneering stuff, right? So if you think about the old pioneers in America, trying to work their way across this country, there's a lot of, finding your way, right? Navigation. But it's like, you only learn to not go over that mountain by either doing it and dying or hearing about it in town, right? It takes community to basically make a successful journey. Mm-hmm. And I think software development and, web development, whatever, like I say, pick your programming, I think is somewhat similar in that it's a constantly evolving world. No one person could possibly know it all. There's, and so I think the strength in a developer community is just that, right? It's that community. It's being able to talk to one another. And there is no expectation that you know how to do everything. It's like, I know how to get to X, but like, how do I move from X to Y? And I don't think that, or I think you're right that, people are very generous with their time and their ability, but I think that it's indicative of a field like that, that's somewhat pioneering. And so, but to sort of take that onto the next step. So I know a lot of the work that you do is with training and upskilling people and helping career switchers make the switch into JavaScript and other languages. And community, it seems like, might be one of those things that's great to know about or great to understand, just because if I'm 40 years old and I'm thinking about making the switch into tech at a later age and I'm intimidated and I'm held back, I think it's great to know that the community is actually there and will have my back, right? And so I wonder if, in your experience in coaching people or helping people make the move, I mean, how much of that conversation is around building a strong community and that sort of thing?
I would say there's so many moving parts to, I mean, like you said, it's an ever-changing kind of landscape. And trying to stay ahead of the curve is like, that is the $1 million question, especially in this industry. But like, I think, if I'm mentoring somebody, especially in a group setting, it's so easy to say, hey, look, like these are your peers now, right? You're all graduating this boot camp or whatever. rely on each other for help or getting past things. But yeah, I'd say like that's 50% of the battle. If you got a good community behind you, I don't really think there's anything you couldn't build or come up with. Like, and I don't care what your IQ is or your intelligence. Like, if you got people sort of pushing you to do good, you're going to level up. And that's one of the things, like the current company I'm working at, I've wanted to work here for 7 years. It's called 1904 Labs, like you said in my intro. And one of the things that I didn't know kind of starting in this journey is like, first of all, any field you're in for mastery, it is a question of how fast can you fail and reiterate and keep learning. And one of the best ways to do that is to literally put yourself in an environment where you either swim or drown. And one of those things is like, okay, when you're coding on your own or learning this, it can be an isolating feeling, right? And you're learning, but you don't know, is this the correct path to go? But when you go to like a consulting firm, like my 1904 Labs is, I'm surrounded by this is probably one of the smartest companies in the Midwest. And I'm surrounded by 80 other people that, have been doing this. They're critically thinking. And you almost would have to be like brain dead to not level up an environment like that. Because just by being there, you're surrounded by people who, have a level of mastery that you don't. They're teaching you new things. You're putting up your code. They're reviewing it. They're either tearing it down or saying, I like this point. And that is the fastest way to learn, is get yourself in an environment. It's just like anything. You want to get better at marketing, hang out with marketers. You want to get better at filming a podcast. I'm sure you guys have other friends that do podcasts. Like, you got to find that environment, and community is like a huge thing, especially if you're trying to go fast.
So I have yet to get that first job. I went to a boot camp, and I've been kind of working on some projects on my own over the last year or so. And I can see how working in an environment like 1904 and having those peers around you can kind of eliminate the analysis paralysis kind of thing. For me, like at the end of the boot camp, the last thing we studied was Python and Django. And so that I went down this huge rabbit hole of learning Django and studying Python and parsing data with Beautiful Soup and all that stuff. And then I realized, I completely forgot everything about JavaScript and React and doing the front end, instead of using a template engine like Django. Now I'm trying to figure out how to do Next.js and then React, and you get on this, squirrel. Instead of focusing on one thing, I'm spending 2 months learning Tailwind CSS and then trying to figure out how to do all, it's like, I could see how working in a company environment and having these people who've kind of been through all these different tracks and learning this and that and know the best route already, essentially like a tour guide or your Sherpa taking you up Everest. That kind of seems like just the ability to have those coworkers around and have someone reviewing your code and telling you, hey, if you did it this way, your performance would be better or whatever. That is kind of invaluable. I think that first gig probably helped out a ton. Can you maybe talk about your first role, the first actual job you got, and coming from being self-taught and the first 6 months of working in a real world environment?
Yeah, so my first job, it was an interesting role to say the least. It was a virtual video production company. So we would do virtual events like before it was cool. And I was actually working there before COVID broke out, and then it like really took off. But they didn't have really a tech guy at all. And I was kind of looking for my first job. putting feelers out there, trying to figure out the way. And we actually have a really cool program out here in St. Louis called Launch Code. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. And what it is like they'll take usually people that are trying to switch careers, and they will upskill them. It's a free boot camp basically, and they also offer job placement. So I was like, all right, maybe I'll take this boot camp. Tried to go through it, and they said, sorry, you know way too much. Like you just have a really high skill level at it already, and like we want to train people that are brand new to this. So I said, all right, but they let me know that they had a job placement, like a job placement service too. So I put my resume in for that, and I ended up hearing back from a startup, that virtual events company, and I worked there, and I was the only tech guy. So I was a team of one, and they essentially had me rebuild their website and build landing pages for different virtual events they were going. So my first job was like, it wasn't like the classical training that most people teach, because I was teaching myself a lot on that job, because I was the only one. There was not really anyone to ask for questions. And when I started making a little bit of money, I even hired tutors here and there to help me with, I think their stack was like PHP and stuff like that. So it was a lot of building on my own, but it also taught me from sort of like really young in my career that like, okay, I can be a leader. I don't always have to play the second fiddle to somebody else, or, listen to the decisions without jumping in and giving my 2 cents. So that was kind of it was an interesting job, to say the least. There was a lot of stress, because I was like, man, how am I going to get this done? But that's also too one of those skills, is like when you're put up against an insurmountable wall, or that error or that bug you don't think you're going to be able to pass, like how do you get past it? What is that process? And for me, like baby steps and just start typing. That's what I started doing, man. I start deleting, or I start typing something until something happens.
Yeah,
like that. Yeah.
Ahead,
So
Ray.
I wonder, can we talk a little bit about, or get your take on anyway, sort of the virtues or non-virtues of being self-taught versus, maybe more of a traditional path. So I don't know. I mean, both Mike and I are big advocates for self-teaching. Neither of us have formal education in the things we do, although I guess Mike has some, but, and I probably have a little bit, over 20 years, but but nonetheless, largely self-taught. How did you find that your self-taughtedness contributed to or took away from your ability to find work doing it?
I really think the ability to find work doesn't matter. That's sort of a nuanced question, I guess. I want to say it doesn't matter, right? Like if you have no formal education, I made it, but I have a business degree from college. So, maybe I do have a little bit of a bias there, or something I'm not seeing working for me. But if you are just like straight up doing this, maybe, you got your high school degree, not much else. It really comes down to, can you do the job? That's what they're looking at you for. And like when you're getting your first job, they're looking at you too, like, can you fit on a team? Are you coachable? Are you somebody that can take feedback? Are you, if I tell you, hey, this isn't the greatest piece of code you've ever written, are you going to go cry somewhere? Or are you going to say, hey, thanks for the advice, stuff like that. So I think a lot of the things that get overlooked, especially for getting your first job, are those soft skills, because a lot of people, whether you're self-taught or not, I mean, you can go on Udemy, you can go on YouTube. They have full courses to get you where you need to be skills-wise, that you can take. But I think a lot of people, I think the difference maker between being self-taught and, going to school is those soft skills of communication, how you work on a team, your willingness to learn. And even working, at this point, it's got to be hundreds of different people on this stuff, people I've been training or people I've just come in contact with. I think a good software developer transcends their education level, point blank. But like what I've noticed is some of the people that are classically trained in this, they lack this sort of scrappiness that I really like. And I see it in you guys, right? Like you're doing this podcast, you got that little scrappy fire, like, get this done. And that's the people I like to be around. That's the people I like to hang with. That's the people I like to work with. But it's that level of grit. And I've seen it in entrepreneurship too. Like you see some people, they open up a business and they feel the dreams that they hope people will come. And then when the rubber meets the road, they got to actually get out there and tell people about it. They back off or the business kind of dissolves or whatever. And then you get people like me, like I'll be out there today putting flyers on cars about my new app, get your gas tax savings back, stuff like that. Like that's something you can't teach. And I'm not saying everyone that's classically trained in it lacks that, but I have noticed that the self-taught devs with those hurdles to overcome or either a chip on their shoulder, they got something out there to prove. Like there's some scrappy MFers, man. And that's what gets you a job.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's, it's obviously the vibe of the entrepreneur, right? The person who's willing to go out and risk it all to, find success in business. It's also it seems to be also the personality of people who are largely into industries that are pioneering. If you're chasing sort of a goalpost that keeps moving, that draws a certain kind of person. But I do think it's good to draw a distinction or understand, the value of self-taught versus traditional. But I understand there's a lot of nuance in there too. But maybe to pile on that, what about people who are maybe later in a career who want to do some, thinking about a career switch? Maybe it's your dentist friend or maybe it's somebody else. And they're ready to make a switch. I think obviously there are more resources than ever to learn this stuff online, and, to use our friend Mike here as an example, he spent a lot of time before he did a boot camp, learning a lot of things on his own. And then he did this boot camp to sort of accelerate that learning and get to a point where he felt like he was ready to, enter the job market. So what do you think about, for maybe a person who's a little older, maybe they already have a career and they're thinking about making the switch into tech? Are boot camps and things like that worth it? Is it better to just, invest your evenings in YouTube videos or what would be your advice?
Yeah. So my advice on that is, like all great advice, it depends. It really depends on your situation. I'm a very goal-oriented person and I have no issues self-motivating. My mom would, since at the time I was in a crib, she would tell me, you have blue eyes, you can do anything you want. So I thought I could grow up, do anything I wanted. So like that kind of stuff, if you're like me, I would say go at it on your own. I did it with the web developer bootcamp Colt Steele course on Udemy. I think I got it for $10 on sale. That's what I started with. But I've also taught boot camps as well. And those have a really great structure. It helps you already get a budding network of people you're working with from that as well. And they can help you place you in jobs too. So it really depends on what you think is worth it. I'm a little bit of a cheap ass. That's why I taught myself. And I know some of those boot camps can be expensive. But I've seen success with both. So I would say I would not shy away from either at this point.
I agree with you. I think your mentality plays a lot into it. Some people need that hand holding to actually get through the first little bits, and even then they need it afterwards. And you could see it in the boot camp that I went through. You could see the students that were like really into it and really working hard, and the ones that were just getting up and doing the bare minimum to try and appease their parents, saying that they're going through something, kind of thing. And I also agree that you can do it on your own. The only one thing that I got out of a boot camp that I probably couldn't get on my own is learning how to work with a team environment in like GitHub and a repo kind of thing. And that I think was a valuable skill set to pick up on out of the boot camp. But I think you could pick that up pretty quickly in the real world, or work in some open source projects and or go to like a weekend kind of thing with some other developers and try and just get something out there real quick. That
brings up a really interesting point I want to touch on, especially for if you're new getting into this. There are a bunch of, so if you think of like getting your first job, you are essentially saying, here is my value proposition. Do you want to hire me based on that or not? And a lot of people compete on the same things, right? They think of software development. They're like, okay, I got to get good at coding, which makes sense. But at a certain point, your level of coding doesn't matter, especially for your first job. They're going to say, okay, you went through a boot camp, you know this, this, and this. So does, the 50 other people that have applied. So it's like, how do you set yourself apart to get that first job? And that's something I've really pondered quite a bit. Because like even at my level, it's like, okay, I'm not going to struggle for a job in this industry, but I've done things that have set me apart. I've grown my LinkedIn audience. I've shown some sort of authority figure on my knowledge on React and JavaScript. Like, I've built a bunch of projects. But how can somebody that's just starting out do that? And that point you brought up right there is something that nobody thinks about, is working on a team, especially for a self-taught dev or even in boot camps. You don't see the value of working on a team, but most of your career will be working on a team. Even if you're the head of the team, you're still leading the team. And that comes down to like things like you said, like Git is still a hang up of mine. I feel like Git is riding a roller coaster, and sometimes it goes off the rails and you're just like, man, this is a nightmare, especially when you're working with 3 or 4 different people. Things like GitHub, things like testing, writing tests. That is something that comes up a bunch that will really make you stand out. And one of the things too I learned on a most recent project I did is I work with a guy that he was a technical writer at one point. And this is something that I didn't even see as a skill for the longest time. But when you're working on a project or you're building something and somebody disseminates information to you, if you can write that down and put it in a Jira ticket or some sort of a work management ticket where somebody else can pick it up and just do it and doesn't have to ask you any questions, how valuable are you to a team? Like rock star value. And it's actually something that's so under the radar, you don't even think about it. But this guy, like, somebody would come up, we'd be working for a client and they say, hey, we need a feature that does this. And, previously it was like, all right, feature that does this, blah, 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 put it in. 2 weeks later, when you actually pick up that work to build it, somebody's reading it and they're like, okay, what the hell is this? Where do I start? Like, I don't know. And then they have to stop and they have to ask you. But then working with this guy, he would stay on the call and say, okay, you need a feature to do this. What's the ACs, meaning acceptance criteria? And he would write down all this acceptance criteria, really write it up technically. We never had an issue on that team. We never had to go back and ask the client what they meant. We never had to ask him what it meant when he wrote it. We never had to do anything. We could just pick up a ticket, say, I'm working on this for the day. You wouldn't even have to hear from somebody, till the next morning stand up, and you'd know they'd be doing the right thing. It's just little things like that you miss until you actually get your first position, that stuff like that is worth its weight in gold, especially when you're working on a team. And I think that's stuff you can compete on that nobody else is going to compete on. Well, other boot camp grads like, yeah, I spent 2 weeks learning technical writing so we could move faster when we write sprints, stuff like that. I don't know. There's a lot of little ways you can stick out.
Yeah, no, that's a terrific insight though, because I mean, I think it's something that you wouldn't just glean as a self-taught person, especially. But I mean, if you're just, if you're not working on a team, or even if you're on a team that maybe doesn't have a guy like you're describing, it may not be, immediately obvious the value of that person. Right. And so I think that insight is huge, because I don't think it's the kind of thing you could just glean on your own. Yeah. So that's huge. And I imagine there are others. So if others occur to you, please pipe in with those, because I think that those are, would be really interesting insights, I think. So, and that maybe leads me into my next question about finding work in the first place. So I'm sure you see this, you're very active on LinkedIn. I've been involved in a couple conversations, mostly as it pertains to design side, but, UX designers, UI designers, people like this who are trying to find work. And I read these stories of woe of these, kids straight out of college, just graduated with their UI design degree. Now they're taking to LinkedIn and they're, getting on all the job boards and they're applying ad nauseum times 150 resumes a day or whatever, these insane numbers that people are putting up. And I tend to have the belief that I don't even know how effective these job boards really are. Like, I mean, it makes it feel like there's a lot of opportunity out there. And I think there really is, but I'm not sure, at least in my experience, I've never gotten a job that way. So I don't know if that's the big thing. For me, I would make the argument, or I always advise these people that, in real life, networking is actually much more valuable than, trying to just submit resumes all day on a job board. But I wonder if you have an insight or a perspective. You probably move people into jobs a lot more often than I do. So maybe you have some ideas, like how do people find a job today?
Man, I've seen so many different ways. Yeah, like I've seen people have success applying on LinkedIn. I've seen them have success applying, just cold applying on like ZipRecruiter, Indeed, Monster, stuff like that. I've seen a lot of networking, like, hey, this job just opened up, you'd be perfect. A lot of these nonprofits are getting started out to place you in jobs now, like Launch Code. That's how I got my first gig. And I think they're starting to become state countrywide, in the United States. So they're pretty handy. God, I used to do some funky stuff when I was desperate. Like the best way. So here's what I always say too, and I want to make this point clear. Like, if you think of like, let's say baseball, we'll just take baseball. A major league pitcher stands on the mound and he throws that ball. All the mechanics that he's gotten down, he's nailed down to get that ball, across to the person. They're just a set of skills, right, that they learn. And that's something that I see too with finding your first job, or just finding a job in general. Like, this transcends, coding. It's just finding a job in general. Every movement that you're making trying to get something to happen is like that pitcher throwing a baseball, right? You got to get every muscle in alignment. And a lot of people don't think of jobs like that. They think that, you've probably seen them. You've been on LinkedIn. It says, I need help. I need a job in the next week. I've sent out, 1,300 applications and been rejected on all of them. And I look at people like that, and while it's very sad, it's also usually, I've talked with quite a few people who have had posts like that, and I've mentored them. And they're people that really don't realize, like, getting your foot in the door somewhere is a skill. And there are individual 1% pieces that you can keep chunking and building on to really become better and better and better, like that pitcher, right? If your elbow's not right, bring it up, whatever. And when I see people like that, they're doing the same thing over and over and over again. They never stop and say, okay, this hasn't worked the 1,200 other times I've done it. Like, maybe something needs to change. And I think, like, the job boards, a lot of people have that sentiment that you do. Like, yeah, they don't work. But they do work, and they've worked for, the last 30 years, essentially. But you have to go about it a special way. And the things that, like, people don't realize is that resume you're sending out, that is the most important initial step, right? Because when somebody doesn't see you or know anything about you and you have to do it cold, all they have to go off of is that piece of paper. So that's the first step I like to take, is make sure that piece of paper is rock solid. And one of the ways that I got away with doing it was I went on Fiverr. I paid a guy $100 to make my resume ATS certified. And all these, like, especially big companies, but even little companies are affording it now. You send your resume in. If you don't have the right keywords, you could be the perfect applicant. That robot's putting you in the discard pile. You're never getting to see a human. And once I was like, all right, as soon as a human sees it, I was having a lot better success on all fronts. Like, as soon as a human saw it, at least I was getting a call back, somebody saying, hey, we're interested in an interview. And it's like, okay, I go to the interview, I screw up, they don't give me the job. Whatever, that's progress, right? We're getting that pitcher's arm in alignment. So that would be the first thing I say is make sure your resume is like ATS certified. Make sure you're getting the humans. And if you really want a job, I used to call people up and say, hey, I tried to apply, but it's not working. Can I send it to the HR lady? And I'd get in front of a real human, even if it was working. I'm like, I'm just going to skip the line. Like, I'm tired of waiting. I actually did that one time for an interview. I just called them up. I was really desperate for a job. And I'm like, hey, yeah, they told me my interview time, but I don't have it. I forgot to write it down on my calendar. Can you give me? And they go, what? Like, you had an interview? Shoot, we forgot. Sorry. Yeah, can we do Wednesday, whatever? And I just show up for an interview.
That's
Why
genius.
not?
That's
But
next
like,
level.
I mean, that's
Well,
like, make sure your resume is good, and then you can start working on the steps from there. First interview, second interview, third interview. Like,
yeah, there's a couple things I want to just sort of pile onto what you're saying, because I think you're right. And I mean, maybe I'm being a little flippant when I'm saying the job boards don't work or whatever, right? Because clearly, I mean, countless numbers of people get hired this way. So I mean, clearly they work. But I think what I'm trying to say is kind of what you're saying, which is if I've sent out 1,200 resumes and nobody's responding, well, the problem isn't with 1,200 companies. The problem is me.
yeah.
And so to your point about building a better resume, I mean, obviously that's a point, that should be taken. One of the other things that occurs to me is don't apply to 1,200 companies. Identify a couple of companies that you actually want to work for and then do the work. And so it's, hey, you want to work for Apple? Okay, well, work for Apple. Figure out how to work for Apple. And it's going to be networking. It's going to be doing just what you did, calling the HR department. And hey, for some reason I can't submit. How do I get it? Or whatever. Maybe Apple wouldn't buy it. But, but the point is, I think that, there's a lot of these different touch points, but I think it's impossible to put a reasonable amount of effort into 1,200 applications, but it's very easy to put a reasonable amount of effort behind 10 or 20. And so I think if you actually take the time and, a lot of people really look at work or finding a job like that company is doing them a favor somehow, right? And they're not looking at their own value. And, like you mentioned, some of the skills that we can add to our repertoire to add value, like we're bringing something to that company as well, right? It's this two-way street. And so for that reason, I think you really do need to almost interview your employers, right? You don't want to shotgun 1,200 companies. You want to go to companies that align with you, spiritually, mentally, physically, whatever. Pick these companies that have values or traits or products or whatever it is that you agree with or that you could be passionate about, and pursue those people with like this white hot passion, right?
Yeah. A lot of people, exactly what you're saying. A lot of people downplay their value. But like, there's a reason a company is going to pay you a salary to work for them. You're bringing value, right? And without you, they can't do what they need. So it is a very two-way street. And that's why, personally, when I'm talking to people, especially coaching them through, you got to bring that up a lot with them. Like, they're like, oh my God, I'm looking for a job. I'm desperate. And I've been there. Like, it's emotional thinking. You're making these kind of decisions from a sort of internal place of weakness. You're like, oh my God, like I will take the first place that says yes to me. But it's not a good strategy. And a lot of people, when I'm mentoring them or coaching them, is like, you go into that interview and you're interviewing them, right? Like, you want to know why you should work here. And the old joke is like, you're telling them how great you are. They're trying to tell you how great the company is to work there. Well, make them prove it. Make them sell it on why you should work there. And I almost approach these interviews with like sort of a questioning mentality. Like, okay, I'm interested, but I'm not sold. What do you guys do here? Is it going to be a good environment? Because I've seen a lot of companies, like, especially when you're getting started, it probably won't be your forever home. If you strike gold on the first one, congrats to you. But a lot of them, sometimes you're going to have to go through a couple companies to find one that you really want to work for. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
And you see it too, as these tech companies. I mean, more and more of these, application processes have a step in there for sort of trying to determine some sort of cultural fit. Are you going to be a fit in the company? Yeah. And so, so to that end, use that to your advantage to say, hey, are they a fit for me? Like, I mean, they're trying to make sure I'm going to fit their mold, whatever they've got going on. But does their mold actually fit, or am I trying to contort myself into it? In which case, I'm going to be wildly uncomfortable the whole time I work.
If I were a hiring manager and I asked someone, "Do you have any questions for us?" and they say, "No, I'm good," that would almost be a red flag for me, because they, like, you want them to ask questions about the company. You want them to, have a desire to learn more about the company before you just spraying and praying resumes out there and, I'm good, and move on to the next one.
Yeah, of course.
Do your research, figure out a little bit about the company, and figure out if it's a good fit for you, because I don't want to go through the hiring process, bring you on board, and have you flake out 2 weeks later. You know what I mean? So
yeah. Well, to that end, it's very costly, right? I mean, for these companies to spend a lot of time on you. So I wanted to ask you just quickly, we've got about 10 minutes to go. What is your thought on sort of I hear people talk about the sort of modern state of work, which is this concept of sort of job hopping for improvement, right? This exists in my industry, in the advertising industry. It didn't used to so much, but maybe in the last 10 to 15 years, it's really become prominent, which is, every time you want a title change, you basically switch companies, right? So if I want to move up in this company or move up professionally, I want to go from associate creative director to creative director, I'm going to have to move companies. I'm going to have to find another opportunity. And so you see this with a lot of companies, who are, or, I guess the value of loyalty doesn't seem to carry as much weight as it once did. So I wonder if you have any perspectives on this sort of job hopping movement, or if it pays to stay, or what your thoughts are.
Yeah. So I actually made a post on this, but I am pro job hopping. A job hop your heart out, because a lot of I'm not going to say all of them. 1904 Labs has treated me incredibly. It's the best place I've ever worked. But a lot of companies see you as a number or a statistic, in my point of view, right? Like, my dad's 82. He's got a very different opinion on this. He goes, "Ryan, you've job hop a lot. Like, they're going to see that on your resume and think something about you and not hire you." And I have job hopped a lot. I'm not going to lie to you, but I've never had an issue getting a new job. And I think the modern economy is almost set up to favor people that do that now. And to the point I want to make is, one of my first bosses, when I broke into this industry, he would go chain smoke and walk around the building. And, we would go on these little talks. He'd be like, "Talbert, come on, we're going for a walk." And I remember he was sitting there chain smoking, and he would just shoot off these one-liners to me. And one of them was, "Never ask for a raise, just switch jobs." I was thinking about it, right? Like, never ask for a raise, just switch jobs. And that year, right, I think it was during COVID, they told us how great we had done, how like big of a family we were, how big we pulled everything together. And I got a 1% raise. So with the rate of inflation yearly, I was actually making less money after the raise than I was before. I remember my boss, like, he told me that, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not even going to ask for a raise. Like, I'm just going to leave. My skills have gotten greater. I'm just going to leave. So I left, right? And the next job I took was a $25,000 a year higher paying position based on what I had learned at that one. And the growing potential was much higher. I got to work in React, which I really wanted to work in. But now I had a senior leader on a team who could teach me. And it's just like a lot of companies, when you leave, I left that job and they said, "We loved working with you. Would a raise help you stay?" And it's kind of interesting that they have the money to do that when you're saying you're leaving. But I never advise, once you put your 2 weeks in, I always tell people leave, because when a raise or a promotion comes up, guess what? You're the guy that almost jumped ship. Like, when you say you're going to do something, do it and never go back on your word. And I've had a lot of success with job hopping. A lot of my friends have had success with job hopping, and I've never seen a downside to it. I'm sure there are some, but in the modern age, like, if you want that pay raise, if you're not learning, that's my 2 criteria. Do you feel like you're getting paid for your work? And do you feel like you're learning? If one's a yes, cool, I'd consider staying. If two's a yes, hell yeah, stay. If you got two no's, it's time to look for greener pastures. So that's my
Yeah.
2 cents.
No, I think it's interesting, and obviously it's a contested point because it obviously changes, it seems, a little bit by demographic. It's funny. I have a family member who's dealing with this right now where she just left a position after nearly 30 years in a company. And basically it amounted to, she wasn't getting the raise she wanted. She couldn't find the vertical growth she wanted, that sort of thing. And so she took a new position and she's not loving it, but the money's better and all that kind of stuff. And now somebody's come out of the woodwork. I mean, she just took this position 3 weeks ago. And a new former boss has reached out to her and says, hey, I've got this new opportunity for you. And she's got this like guilt, right? Because she's, in her 40s and has sort of that mentality that you be loyal to your company, right? And,
Yeah.
these people put a lot of money into me and they did all this stuff to make sure I could come on board. And here I am going to jump ship. And I was talking to her about this yesterday. I was like, well, at the end of the day, that loyalty thing's out the window. And if you're not taking care of yourself, they're looking for how to pay you the least to get the most output, basically. And to our discussion a few moments ago about maybe, interview the companies you want to work with and find the companies that want to work with you. I mean, if companies are savvy and companies are smart, they're going to start figuring out this job hopping thing. And if it doesn't behoove them, maybe there's some deep state stuff going on in business where they know that this is actually better for them. But like, they should understand or be preemptive that the reason everybody's moving is for this reason. So if I can afford to pay more for that position, I should be paying more for that position. And so, if companies choose not to do that, that's their business, but you will hop, right? And it's not always money, to your point, right? If you have one of the two things, if you're learning and you're happy with that, then cool. I mean, it's not always money. Like in the case of this family member, she took more money, but she has to leave to work at 3 a.m. And like, who wants to do that? No, I don't want to do that. Like, there's no amount of money they could pay me that would make it worth it.
Yeah.
And so,
money stops being everything when you're really struggling, especially if you got nothing going on and it's your first job. Money is pretty much anything or everything. But when you actually get on the job and you start to realize, okay, they're mistreating me, or they're, like, the money's cool, but I can go elsewhere and, they'll be nicer or not yell at me when I ask a question or something like that. It becomes a really easy switch. And it's like, man, life is so short. Why would you work at a place you hate? People look at me. This guy, he was at Costco and his tire, he got a flat and I helped him change it. And he was a teacher and he asked me where I work. And I'm like, 1904 Labs, greatest company on earth. He looked at me like I had two heads. He's like, I've never met anyone that likes what they do. And I'm like, man, that is so weird to me. Like, we spend so much time working. Why not love it? So if job hopping's what it takes to do it, do it.
That's actually been kind of a priority for me in my life. I've always kind of lived meagerly, just enough to kind of like pay the bills and do what I need. And as a DJ, it's kind of nice to work Friday and Saturday night and have the rest of the week off. Yeah. And that kind of mentality has kind of been my approach to, like, live first and work second, and if you can have the best of both worlds, where you have a job that you love and you enjoy doing it and you get paid really well for it, that's even better. So
yeah, of course.
Yeah. Before we bounce, we're almost at that time. The last thing I want to talk about is developing your network on LinkedIn. How did you get 16,000 followers in such a short amount of time? That's just next level. That's pretty impressive. And I think it's consistency and quality of posts and discussion that builds that fast. Can you maybe break that down for us?
For sure. I remember I was sitting at work one day and I'm like, man, I need a new goal. I start to get depressed if I don't have a goal. And I was like, all right, why don't I shoot for 10,000 followers on LinkedIn? Why not? It seems like one of the easiest platforms to get started on. So I was like, all right, I'm going to post daily. That's one thing you can't skimp out on, post daily. But the thing too was like, just let go, like post some stuff. Man, some of it'll be good, some of it will be bad. And the crazy thing is, I've gotten more likes on my bad posts or people telling me I was wrong. The engagement is insane, man. Like, if you post a video with a wrong answer, people go crazy over that, share everything. You just get more and more followers. But like, it's really about like just pick a niche, make your bio about it. Like I said, when you come to my page, it says I teach career switchers JavaScript. That's it. Make your bio about it and then stick to that lane. Just post about it, one thing a day. And you start to learn headlines that are kind of, you know, some are more inflammatory than others. Some make you click on it. Some people pass up on them. So you learn as you go along, but just pick something you feel like you're an expert in, start posting about it. And yeah, it's one of those things. There's no magic bullet, but it is hard to keep somebody down that is posting daily about stuff. And my other thing is never, maybe not never apologize, but like when you post something, just stick to it. Like a lot of people are following you because of your personality, you know, and to have a personality, you have to have some people that absolutely love your content and some people that hate it. And the fastest way to get big is to find the stuff that people hate and the stuff that people love and really just hammer home on that. Like I have one that I think I do. There's 3 differences between a $50,000 React dev and a $100,000 dev. Man, that sets people off. I get people making fun of me. I get people that love it. I get people sharing it. I get people going, oh, this douchebag again. Like I love stuff like that because it's just engagement and it gets people talking and it's fun. So don't be afraid to like kind of go out on a limb. That's my advice.
I also noticed you don't have a portfolio, or we couldn't find a link on your LinkedIn page. You're obviously at that point where you don't necessarily need it because you've got the gigs and the work history, but obviously as someone up and coming, you would think a portfolio is necessary. Do you, you know what I'm getting at? Do you have a personal website that I just couldn't find?
I had one for a long time. I let the domain expire. I don't really use it too much. I really let GitHub be my portfolio, especially. But yeah, like I remember one job that I got, they wanted to do a coding test, and I hate coding in front of people, hate it. So I was like, well, what if I just walk you through one of my portfolio projects? Because that's one of the, like, that's more real world than you watching me code something in front of you. And they're like, sure, nobody's ever asked us that. So I took them to my GitHub, fired it up, said, look at this code I wrote here. I did this, this, and this. They're like, cool. They hired me. So, yeah, I kind of just brought it up as needed. Really never had anything that, you know, you could go here and check out. So it's not super necessary in my opinion, but I've seen people be successful with them, seen people be successful without them. So
perfect.
Yeah, love it. Well, so on that note, do you want to give people a quick, you know, where can they find you online? You know, since it's not your portfolio, where's the best place to track you now?
Yeah, if you want to see what I'm up to, LinkedIn, Ryan Talbert. I think it's linkedin.com/RYAN-TALBERT. And if you really want to support me, like I said, I got, if you're living in Missouri buying gas, I got that app out called Mo Gas Tax Back. It's on both iOS and Android. You just take a picture of your receipt and get some gas money back. So, yeah.
Love it.
Love it. That's awesome. Well, thanks so much, Ryan, for taking the time to do this. It's been awesome and really great insights. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, awesome meeting you guys. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, and thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. We'll see you guys next time.